kids. Welcome back to another pizza party. I'm Mrs. Pizza, and today we're here to talk about something that I've been searching for a lot recently, and so I'm making a video because I want this video to exist for me. But like, not me, you. Like, I wanted this video, and I couldn't find it, so I made it. I hope that makes sense. Also, Winnie and Cheese just went outside. They will probably come barreling in here like the Kool-Aid man any minute now. But while we have a moment of peace, let's get started. Today, I wanted to talk about funny fantasy. I did a deep dive recently because I felt like my moody mood reading was taking me to a place where I just wanted to read something funny, but also fantasy. And I went through all the channels. I went through the YouTube, I went through the Reddit, I went unscoured the internet, and a lot of the times I was getting a lot of the same answers, which is good because that means that these books come highly recommended. But also I wanted to throw a few in the mix. And so here's a few funny fantasy to get you started on your journey. The first couple books we're going to talk about are the ones that everybody's going to recommend. If you're looking for something funny, haha, you want a good giggle, but you want it to be fantasy, where do you go? You go to Discworld by Terry Pratchett. You would not believe the amount of times where I would find a Reddit thread, a group on the internet that was talking about funny fantasy, and this was just always on the top of the list, and so I dove in. Now, there are a lot of books in the Discworld series, and I have not read all of them. But I did take some advice of some people on the internet because sometimes you can trust them. Not always, but sometimes you can trust them. And they said that you could skip the first two books in Discworld altogether, or if you really need to be a completionist, go back later and finish them. There are series within the series that is Discworld. So when you're looking at the books, it's like this is book 3 of Discworld, but book 1 of Witches, book 4 of Discworld, but book 1 of Death. And so that is how you can kind of pick which series of books you want to go down. I decided to start with witches because I like witch books. I like witchy books, and I was here to laugh. So the first book that I picked up in Discworld was Equal Rites. And this is the story of Esk, I believe is how you would say it. I'm going to say Esk. I think it was supposed to be like ask because she asked a lot of questions. In the opening of this book, we have a wizard that is traveling on foot and doing some sort of magical direction finding. He's got his magical GPS working for him, and he shows up at the house of this family. They live in a town called Badass in the Ramtop Mountains, and he gives his magical ability. He passes down his wizardness to which he thinks is going to be this son that is, it's like the 7th son of the 7th son or something like that, or the 8th son of the 8th son, but it's some sort of magical fantasy. You're the 8th son of the 8th son, so you get to be a wizard, but it's not a boy that's born, it's a girl. And so then we have Ask, who is kind of in this in-between because women are witches, men are wizards, and they've never had one that's either both, or they've never had a girl wizard before. So she ends up being, as she grows up, given into the care of Granny Weatherwax, who is hilarious. These books are so funny, but you are going on an adventure with this child who is out of their element, out of their scope. They have these magical powers. They're very precocious. They ask a lot of questions, but they're on an adventure that is just way above their pay grade. And that is one of my favorite things in books. I love a kid or a group of kids that are just doing something way above where they should be. This is hilarious. It's a lot of fun. It's a silly time. And these books, all of the Discworld books I've read so far, are kind of playing, they like border on satire. They're playing with stereotypes. They're really hamming it up with stereotypes to the point where Granny Weatherwax is upset that she has such a lovely complexion and all of her teeth because of that damn metabolism. She's not covered in warts and toothless, which would be much more pleasing to her witchy aesthetic. These books will make you giggle. And the next book that I picked up after that actually decided to step into the Death series within Discworld, and I picked up Mort, which is another one about a kid in a world, in a job above his pay grade. We have Mort, who is a young man who through circumstances ends up being the apprentice to Death and given way too much responsibility early on, stumbling into these crazy scenarios while Death is off there trying to take a holiday. He just like a little break, you know? Mort is funny. It's a teenage boy who becomes Death. I will say I had a good time with this. You laugh. Death is hilarious. Mort is just hapless. It's just a funny, good time. And the third book that I've picked up from Discworld so far. I decided to jump back into the Witches series, and it was by far my favorite of the ones I've read, and that was Wyrdsisters. This is the second book in the Witches series within Discworld, and in this book we are following 3 witches. We have Nanny Og, Granny Weatherwax, and is it Madrag? Magrat. That's what it was. These 3 witches are all very different stereotypes of witches, and this is it's a play on Shakespeare. It's a play on, it's a play on Hamlet, I believe. It's been so long since I've read Shakespeare. It's a little bit of, I'm going to use the word satire. It's a play on stereotypes. It's a play on these kings and these witches and all of the parts they have to play. This book, by far my favorite of all of the Discworld books I've read so far, which is 3, but still, I'm new. Give me a break. This was hilarious. I laughed a lot in this book. These 3 witches who are just trying to project the most witchy of witchy in their own individual ways. They're all very different kinds of witches. They all have their own kind of way of being witches, but they get accidentally sucked into this whole plot where the king has been assassinated and his child has been whisked away, the heir to the throne hidden away, while this duke takes control over the kingdom. He starts to have a little bit of a mental breakdown. There's a lot of hand washing, a lot of, out damn spot kind of thing. And so this was really, really funny. We also have another appearance from death. And that's the thing about these Discworld books, is that they obviously visit the same cities. A lot of the towns we're going to, it's an entire world that has kind of been fleshed out in this author's mind. And so these stories, although they are taking place in the same series, I feel like you could probably pick up Wyrdsisters and still have a really good time without having read Equal Rites before it. These books are hilarious. They are hands down some of the funniest reads I've ever read, and I understand why everyone recommends Discworld when they're looking for funny fantasy. The next book we're going to talk about is one that I absolutely enjoyed the heck out of, and the sequel just released, but I believe the sequel is going to have a little bit of a different feel to it, a different vibe. I think it's going to be a different narrator, but that book is The Blacktongue Thief, and this is by Christopher Buehlman. This book is really funny in that we have the point of view, our narrator is our character Kinch, who is a thief, and he has a black tongue, hence the title. He has grown up in this fantasy world that is post-war, and he, at a very young age, joined a thieves guild and has been basically raised to become a thief. But once you graduate from thief school, you then have to pay a tithe to the school, and our main character is behind on payments. When in the opening of this story, he is with a group of thieves trying to rob someone. This highway type robbery goes awry very quickly, and through circumstances, our main character ends up going on a journey with the person they tried to rob in the first place. Kinch is hilarious. And you realize throughout the book, the tone starts in the very beginning, but Kinch is the kind of person to laugh at a funeral. He is making jokes to deal with some of the horrific things that are going on around him, and sometimes it'll slip just a little bit and you can tell that's what he's doing, but you're still going to have an absolutely delightful time laughing at some of these things that happen. Even when it gets really dark, it never gets far away from funny. This is really, really well done. I love the story here, and Kinch is a character. He has his own set of morals. He has his own sets of motivators, but the whole time Kinch is he's going to make you laugh. You would not want to be sitting next to him at an event that had a very somber and serious tone, because he's going to find the funny in it. I really liked The Blacktongue Thief, and I am currently reading the sequel, which I haven't gotten that far into it, but it's actually from a different character's point of view, so we're not getting the humor that we got with Kinch. If you're looking for something funny, I had a really great time with this, and I am excited to keep reading in the series. I hope we get back to Kinch's point of view eventually. The next couple books we're going to talk about are fantasy romance funny ones, because I read a lot of fantasy romance and I really like to read fantasy romance rom-coms. And sometimes things claim to be rom-coms, but they are not rom-com. I don't know who thinks these things are funny. Just because it has a few chuckles in it doesn't make it a rom-com, Sometimes I'm looking for things that are actually going to make me laugh. So the first book we're going to talk about is one of my absolute favorite fantasy romance books, and that is Swordheart by t.kingfisher. This is the story of Hala, and she is a housekeeper. She's a widowed housekeeper who works for her uncle by marriage. And one day he he passes away and wills all of his fortune and his house full of oddities to Hala. But his family is not having it. They do not want Hala to have all of this money and property. And so they lock Hala in a room and basically are trying to force her to marry one of the gross cousins. He has like zero spine and really sweaty hands. So Hala, in a moment of desperation, in one of these rooms full of oddities she's been locked in, pulls out a sword, unsheaths it, and like a genie in a bottle, a man pops out. And his name is Sarkis, and he is the servant of the sword. And him and Hala go on an adventure to save Hala from these awful people. This is incredibly cozy in that we are not trying to save the world. We're just trying to save Hala from these awful people. We meet characters along the way that become our found family. We have a little bit of a road trip adventure happening. But really, we just have Sarkis and Hala making you laugh because Sarkis is grumpy and snippy and a little sarcastic. And Hala is, I hate to say it, but kind of an accidental genius because everybody thinks that she's this bumbling, fumbling fool. And she has this really dizzying way that she thinks, but she uses this dizzying kind of fast moving, puzzling kind of silly speak to confuse people when she's in trouble. Hala is hilarious. Sarkis is also quite funny. Some of the friends we make along the way also have some good one-liners. This is the kind of book that you're just kind of giggling all the way through as Sarkis and Hala and our friends go on this adventure and Sarkis and Hala fall in love. I love this book. I feel like it's very sweet. The stakes aren't super high. I reread this anytime I need to feel good and have a few giggles. The next book we're going to talk about is also from t.kingfisher, and this is actually a series. This is a series that this author is independently publishing, and that is The Saints of Steel. And so far, I've read all of the books in this series, of which there are currently 4. But my favorite is still the very first one, and that's the one I'm going to recommend, and that is Paladins Grace. This is the story of Stephen, and he is a paladin, but it kind of has a little bit of a darker start to it in that t.kingfisher perfect way. This author is really good at writing banter and friendships and things that feel fantasy, fairy tale, but like have almost like a darker corner to them, a darker edge, but you never feel incredibly bogged down. See, Stephen is a paladin of the Saint of Steel, and these paladins were blessed by this saint, and when they were chosen, they would become berserker type warriors. So they would have this thing called the battle tide, rise. They refer to it as the black tide, I believe, and basically go into absolute berserker mode to battle the bad guys. Well, one day the saint died. No one knows why this god is dead, but the god just died, and it sent all of the berserkers into a tailspin. A lot of them not surviving the god's death as well. So there's a small group of these paladins who have been taken in by another religious group called the White Rat, and they are now working as kind of security paladins for this religious order that doesn't, they're more of like the bookkeepers and lawyers of, they do a lot of philanthropy and like, you have to read the book. The White Rat is not flush with warriors, and so they take in these warriors to kind of help them out in their crusades of the White Rat. So Stephen and a handful of his friends are all the main characters in these paladin stories. Each book in this series follows a different paladin on their story of finding love. Now, Stephen is depressed, as you would be. He's having a hard time with it. I mean, he lost a lot of his friends. He's in this weird position now because he's lost his purpose in life. And he ends up stumbling upon Grace, who is a perfumer, when this crime happens, I believe at like a royal party. And these two end up teaming up together to try and solve this mystery of what's happening. There's some sort of interesting mystery elements to this. There's even a slight amount of court case that happens in this as well. But Stephen and Grace go on this adventure together. And I liked this because neither one, they're both older. They've got their own baggage they come into their relationship with. But the banter is fun, and there's a lot of incredibly funny moments. I mean, they are literally stepping on severed heads at one point, and you're laughing about it. t.kingfisher is really, really good with making their fantasy stories funny without making them too silly. You have a good time and you laugh, but when you think back on it and you're like, gosh, they were stepping on severed heads and I was laughing about it. What does that say about me? I've liked every book in this series just fine, but the first one, Paladins Grace, was my absolute favorite and definitely a funny fantasy romance. The next books we're going to talk about, and you're going to be so surprised because if you've watched any of my other videos, I've never talked about these before. The Meadmishaps series by Kimberly Lemming. I know, surprise, surprise. I found another way to bring up these books. We're going to talk about these in order. How about that? The first book is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. This is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. This is the story of Cinnamon, and she's a spice farmer living in a small town in a fantasy world. Cinnamon likes her life. She's perfect just where she is. She has her friends, she has her farm, she has her family, and she has no aspirations of adventure. When one day, stumbling home from a festival in town, slightly intoxicated, she encounters someone in trouble, she saves them, and they just happen to be a demon. So she accidentally saves a demon. Now, in this world, a demon is kind of a catch-all word for a multitude of fantasy creatures. Everything from werewolves to nagas to other kinds of crazy shapeshifters and orcs, and demon can mean a lot of things. The demon that Cinnamon saves is Fallon, and he and Cinnamon end up going on an adventure together when he informs Cinnamon of the stakes of this fantasy world. She doesn't want to go on an adventure, but here she goes on an adventure, and these two fall in love, you laugh, and then spicy things happen. The next book in the series, That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf, is following Cinnamon's best friend Bree, who is a cheesemaker, who one day at a festival in town, someone tries to slip her a love potion. She doesn't realize it, but she turns around and chucks the love potion at the person that was trying to slip it into her drink, and he ducks at the last second. She hits a werewolf square in the back, and he turns around and professes his undying love to Bree. Now, Felix is convinced that Bree is his fated mate because he's a werewolf, and werewolves just know these things, but Bree has a lot of things going on with this because he just got hit with a love potion. She can't believe anything he says about being in love with her. And then these two fall in love. This one gets spicy quick. And I really had a good time with this. One of my favorite characters in the series first shows up in a novella that is not in the traditionally published series, but she shows back up in this one. She's a sentient sword named Alexis, and she's highly inappropriate and a very good time. And the last book in the series that is out so far is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human. This is the story of Dante, and he is a demon, and he was staying in the small town that Bree and Cinnamon live in, and everybody was just linking up. The relationships were popping up like crazy. Everybody is a super couple now, except for Dante, and he's ready to go find his fated mate. So he leaves this small town and doesn't make it far before he ends up on an island with a tower where a woman named Cherry is being kept hostage by a dragon. And so Dante quickly comes to the conclusion that if Cherry wants off this island, he's going to help her. But Cherry doesn't know that, and she's been stuck on this island for so long, she's desperate to get off. So she decides to drug Dante in order to coerce him to aid in her escape, not knowing that he would have helped anyways. Then these two end up accidentally mate bonded because Dante was high off of his butt. There's a bowl of fruit, I'm pretty sure, that was talking to him in this. So these two end up kind of in a marriage of convenience, stuck together type situation where they slowly figure out that they're perfect for each other. Again, it's a funny, silly, sexy, good time. I love those books. I talk about them incessantly. I feel like it is my job to bring them up whenever possible. And the last couple books we're going to talk about are some that I read pretty recently, and they fit into this silly fantasy romance kind of vibe. And those are the Kind of Fairy Tales by Cassandra Gannon. Cassandra Gannon writes some pretty wild, her and Elizabeth Gannon, who I believe is her sister, writes some pretty wild fantasy romance and sci-fi romance. Just romance in general. I feel like sometimes they're probably trying to make each other laugh just based on the concept of like, well, let's make one where she falls in love with a dinosaur thing, you know? They're silly, sexy, good times. I've read 2 books in the Kind of Fairy Tale series. The first book is Wicked, Ugly, Bad, I believe. I have not read that one. And that is a big bad wolf, Red Riding Hood relationship. But this whole like fantasy fairy tale world is very similar to the world of Shrek, specifically Shrek 2, where they have a lot of modern conveniences. They have cell phones and TVs, but also like magical toadstools and other magical fairy tale nonsense. If you've seen Shrek 2, you know what I'm talking about, where they ride the carriage that can fly through the drive-thru type situation. It's very Shrek 2 as far as the world goes. Modern conveniences with a fairy tale twist. Also in this world, you are either born good or bad. If you are born into one of these 2 categories, that's all you get. You're either good or bad, and that's the side you're on. Now, like most things, if you're born good, that doesn't actually mean you're good, or if you're born bad, doesn't actually mean you're bad. One of the benefits of being born bad is when you see your one true love, you know immediately, where with the goods, it takes a little bit longer. And so in this world, everybody has their one true love. In the books I read, it was Beast in Shining Armor was the second book, the first one I read in the series, and that one is a Beauty and the Beast retelling where we have the prince and Belle, but the Beast is the bad guy character. He's this very spoiled, snobby, gets whatever he wants type character, and Belle has known him since they were just very small children. I think they were in kindergarten together, and they've always kind of bickered. They've been rivals. She doesn't let him get away with his nonsense. He bullies everyone, and she's not letting him bully her. So these two kind of have this rivals to lovers situation. They end up in this competition where they have to make it through a maze together and teaming up. You're also flashing back and forth to different points in time that were very important to the relationship they have, whether that was when they were small children or teenagers or what have you. This one was fine and definitely had its funny moments, but I'm telling you about this entire series so that we can get to the Kingpin of Camelot. This one is funny, and I really enjoyed it. It's the third book in the series, and this is a King Midas retelling. Except for, in this world, Midas isn't the king, he's a kingpin. He's a mob boss, a criminal underworld boss, and he's raised through the ranks. He's taken himself from abject poverty to being the most wealthy and successful criminal boss, bad guy of the kingdom he's in. When one day, at a great big party where he is completely bored, the queen of the realm, Guinevere, walks in. She's dirty, looks exhausted, and she's carrying her small child in her arms, and she's begging for Midas's help. Now, Midas is a bad guy, and Guinevere is the wife of the king who has recently passed away, Arthur, and he was a good guy. Guinevere is a good person, and she's ended up on Midas's doorstep begging for help because she has this, what he believes, misplaced faith in him. She thinks he's just misunderstood. She looks at him like he's just this big puppy that nobody else can really understand what he's really going through. And he is 100% like, how are you getting this wrong? I'm a bad guy. Everyone else knows I'm a bad guy. What are you talking about? When she's just like looking at him, thinking he's just so misunderstood. I had a really good time with this. It's spicy, it's funny. Guinevere ends up on his doorstep because this character called the Scarecrow is trying to take over the realm now that Arthur is gone. And so Guinevere needs his help. So they have this trying to protect Guinevere and her child from the Scarecrow, figuring out what's going on. I had a really good time with this. Cassandra Gannon, it's a silly good time and you're gonna laugh. Hi, Cheese. You gonna go get in the cheese spot? Oh, you're so warm from being outside. Hi. This makes me worried because that means Winnie's outside by herself, probably digging holes. But that, kids, is where we're going to end this pizza party. There's some books to get you started on your funny fantasy journey. I'm still on mine. I need some more funny fantasy recs. I need some more funny fantasy books because I need them. They make me so happy. So if you have some recs for me, please leave them in the comments. I need your recommendations. If you had a good time hanging out with me and Cheese, who just showed up, the dogs did not hang out this time, please subscribe. I hope you're reading good books out there, wherever you are, and we'll see you next time.